Thank you. Thank you very much for that. It's always a stirring introduction when someone has to say that you're not an enemy of the American people in introducing you. Sometimes when I marvel at the revolution in communications in my lifetime, I look back to the day when I arrived at Brown as a freshly minted freshman on a September Sunday morning in 1974. Most folks here don't know very much about Brown, except, of course, that it claims Bobby Jindal as its most famous Louisiana alumnus. There is some difference between us. For one thing, he's a much younger fellow, so we actually weren't on campus at the same time. And although I didn't know him at the time, I'm confident that he studied harder than I did. On my first day at Brown, there was a lot to do. We lined up to get keys to our dorm rooms and our identification cards and our meal tickets. In the evening, they herded all the freshmen into a big hockey auditorium for a pep talk with the dean. September 8th was a historic day, he told us, and not only because we were embarking on a grand educational adventure. Two actual historic things had happened that day, he said, and he went on to explain what they were. One was that Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, and the other was that Evel Knievel did not make it over the Snake River. The students in the auditorium gasped. Nobody knew. But today, everyone would know. Never in history has information moved more quickly. Never in history have more people had access to more information, and never in history has information been so readily available. Today, while you're sitting here with me, you can reach into your trousers and fetch out a device that will help you look up the age of Sean Connery, the depth of the Pacific Ocean, and the federal budget of Japan. So the paradox is that we're more well-informed than ever, and yet we feel less well-informed. Well, I think it's obvious why we're more well-informed, but why do we feel less well-informed? One reason, I suspect, is that there's so much information, and it's so easy to spread information, whether it's true or false. When I was young, technology limited the dissemination of news to a few outlets, each of which had to make a tremendous capital investment to get into the game. There were 3 TV stations, a handful of radio stations, chiefly playing music, and 2 newspapers, often jointly owned, as was the case here in Baton Rouge. Most folks got their news from a limited number of outlets who more or less honored the same standards of accuracy and newsworthiness. Walter Cronkite was universally regarded as the most trusted man in America. Who would hold that title now? And could we all agree on a single figure? And would it be a media figure at all? One consequence was that everyone got the same news, and while folks had different opinions, often expressed with passion and even violence, just like today, they worked off the same set of facts. But today, all that seems as distant as 1974. Now, in the fake news era, we can't even agree on what news is. If we don't like what we're hearing, we dismiss it as fake. It's fashionable these days to be alarmed about fake news, but it isn't new, and it predates the internet era. The Salem witch hunt was fake news. As Jack Hamilton recently wrote in an opinion piece in our paper, in 1902, the esteemed editor of Leslie's Monthly made up a fake news story in an effort to boost circulation. His magazine wrote about miniature horses being bred in Rhode Island, where cold temperatures kept horses from reaching full size. Folks came from all over to put their eyes on these Lilliputian stallions, and they were all disappointed. I think the greatest orgy of fake news in my lifetime thrived for 25 years, all before Al Gore invented the internet. For a generation, profiteers worked to sell the idea that the Kennedy assassination was a work of a grand conspiracy. They did it by selling books, taking advantage of the gullibility of TV talk show hosts, and ultimately producing a $200 million Hollywood blockbuster. Oliver Stone's 3-hour picture shaped the views of a generation born long after the assassination had faded from memory. That picture, by the way, was shot in Louisiana before the era of massive government subsidies for movie making, and it lionized New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, who should more properly have been vilified. Today, fake news is more available and easier to create, so it's more prevalent and it's more troubling, but I'm not sure it's more consequential. My hunch is that fake news chiefly reinforces people's biases, and it largely works because P.T. Barnum was right about what happens every 60 seconds. So the real problem isn't that we have fake news, it's that we have less real news. The business model for the American news industry is under assault, and it has been for 2 decades now. When I was young and in college, I didn't read the daily newspaper very often because I wasn't from Rhode Island, and I wasn't interested in the 2 topics they covered relentlessly: the Red Sox and the Mafia. But I had to buy it once in a while, for example, if I wanted to go see a picture. And when I did, I marveled at what a great business newspapering must be. The guy who owned the Providence Journal was making money on the buy side and the sell side of my transaction, meaning he was selling an ad to the owner of the theater, and then I had to buy his newspaper in order to see that guy's ad. This, I thought, was a business where nothing could go wrong. But we all know how that turned out. Our business was deeply wounded by technology, and I was going to show you a slide that shows the damage to advertising, and this is a nationwide slide. It doesn't relate to what's happening in Louisiana, which I'm fixing to explain will be different. There it is. There was a time, the red line is print advertising revenue, and the blue line is online advertising revenue. There was a time when local newspapers enjoyed a secure monopoly on many forms of advertising: motion picture listings, or real estate, or cars for sale, or goods and services. But as print advertising declined, it would be nice to think that it will just be replaced by digital advertising. But as this chart shows, that's not the case. Digital ad rates are much lower, and you're competing with companies like Facebook. So while we're paying reporters to go to murder scenes and concerts and baseball games, Facebook gets its content for free. One bright spot is that some of the losses can be made up through higher subscription rates, and that has helped ease some of the downward slope, but not all of it. And one consequence of that is that the number of boots on the ground has been shrinking, which means there's less real news. And that chart shows the number of people in newsrooms over time. One thing that's a little deceptive about that chart is that if you look at the axis on the vertical axis, it goes from 55 to 35,000. So it makes it seem like the thing's falling to zero, and it isn't. But these charts show national trends. But what's going on from Seattle to Sarasota does not have to happen here in Louisiana. While companies like the Times-Picayune have reacted to these unfavorable trends by retreating, we are aiming to grow. And we have been by growing into New Orleans and Acadiana. The New Orleans Advocate has twice as many paying subscribers as the day I started. And our web traffic has more than doubled as well, in part due to our coverage of the tragedies of the summer of 2016 here in Baton Rouge, as the Advocate brand expands to more markets. We are committed to a 7-day-a-week, home-delivered print model and a website rooted in real news, not clickbait. We have a local owner, which is a towering asset. When the Advocate falls short, the owner hears about it because he's here in our community, not in New York. It makes us more aware, more responsive, and more committed. Since Dathel and John Georges bought the Advocate in 2013, we've built a new headquarters in Baton Rouge. I'm sure you all have seen. It's on I-10, right near the Three Crosses at Seagan. And this year, we opened our new office in New Orleans, right on St. Charles Avenue. That's a location where the news comes right to your front door, and just last month, right down the street, this happened. So, we've also made other investments behind the scenes, like an upgrade in press flexibility in our printing plant, and and more equipment to insert coupons, thanks, to serve advertisers better. We're the only newspaper company in Louisiana that is increasing its commitment to traditional journalism. This year, we'll reopen a Washington bureau to better cover the important national issues that impact Louisiana, including flood recovery grants for the Baton Rouge area. We formed an investigative team under Gordon Russell, who is Louisiana's leading investigative journalist, and built his reputation as the first reporter to discover that Ray Nagin was not a reformer, but a crook. The same was true for Bill Jefferson and his kleptocratic family. The values of shoe leather journalism are under attack from politicians everywhere, and from an economic model that will need to change. H.L. Mencken once said that freedom of the press is guaranteed only to those who own one. But thanks to the democratizing influence of technology, that's not nearly so true anymore. But bloggers and social media and sports and entertainment websites aren't going to keep politicians honest, and they aren't going to expose government waste, and they aren't going to offer sober evaluations of the great civic issues we face, like the growth of state giveaway programs, or the disinvestment in higher education, or the complexities of disaster recovery. Louisiana needs a muscular daily newspaper to do that, and we are committed to providing one. Thank you very much.
Peter can take some questions, and we have a couple of microphones, so if you have a question, hold your hand up, and the folks on the ends will bring the mics over.
Okay. Hi. Do any of these online outlets that present or publish quote-unquote fake news, do they hold any liability of getting sued for libel or anything along those lines?
That's a great question. Did everyone hear the question? That's a great question. Thanks to the power of the First Amendment, generally the way libel laws are written in the United States are generally very favorable to the media, not because they're favorable to big companies, but because they're favorable to public discourse. And so all of these outlets do have some theoretical liability, but I don't think that libel law, for the most part, is going to restrain their activities. And also, another feature of this is that in order to sue someone for libel, they have to have something worth that you can sue them that they could actually pay you. And in many cases, you wouldn't get anything, and so nobody sues.
Pardon me. Can you speak to the problems up here?
Oh, okay, there you are. Okay, yeah. Okay.
Voices up in the, yeah. Can you speak to the problems that you have online with getting the funnies? I believe if you put the comics online, you have trouble keeping the paper in print, because I buy the paper and have it delivered 7 days a week. Mostly to read the funnies. Okay,
well, I'm glad you asked that. We are a typical newspaper company in the sense that we make between 85, something like that, 90% of our revenue through subscribers and advertising. So we want to keep you where you are, and so it wouldn't really be in our interest to put that online. You may ultimately get to a point where you are charging people for online content, and if you look at, Gannett is doing that around in their communities in Louisiana, which is Lafayette and Shreveport and Monroe, Alexandria, and they're doing that. The New York Times, is doing that very successfully. They're selling digital subscriptions as never before to Trump haters all around the country. And yet at the same time, the New York Times, people ask whether this works. At the same time, the New York Times is offering severance packages to hundreds of employees right now, despite all that new revenue. So we may get to a point where we're a pay digital product, but we're not there yet, and I'm not quite sure that we've seen someone who's made a success out of giving up being a print product in favor of that. So the answer is no.
This isn't a question,
Okay.
it's a comment. I just wanted to say thank you for the story on Sunday on the National Flood Insurance Program. It was the clearest, most complete, fascinating piece I have read on that. So thank you for putting Ted Griggs behind that. It was awesome.
Okay, thank you. He did a nice job on that, and that's going to be a big issue for Louisiana, and, if that program expires, it'll be bad to be in the real estate business. Yeah.
Could you comment on some of the colleges' positions now that used to be the place to be free speech, who are becoming more restrictive?
Yeah. Could I comment on what's going on in colleges with restrictions of freedom of speech? Fortunately, in fact, there was a bill passed that the governor vetoed yesterday that was supposed to protect against that he, I think, correctly said was an unnecessary bill because it should be protected by the First Amendment. I think what's going on I don't think it's a good thing to restrict free speech in any way. And I think when colleges restrict free speech or when students restrict free speech, that's not a service to democracy. And hearing wounding speech is part of growing up, and learning to live with it is part of growing up. And also, I think, the best disinfectant for bad ideas is to let more people hear them and to have open debate on them. So I think it's a bad thing. I don't think we've actually had any of that in Louisiana, though. So.
What is stopping you from really going paid digital?
What's stopping us from really going paid digital? There are a variety of reasons, including, we're a small company. We operate in this part of Louisiana. We have not exactly. So one thing that we can do is we can watch big companies. For example, Gannett owns 100 newspapers, and they're all the time experimenting with models that might work better. And we have the benefit of watching what they do, and so we can, rather than make a radical change to our business that in some ways puts it at risk and its importance to the community, we can let other people do that experimenting and see whether anyone has a success. And I have to say, I don't think anyone's had a success with that model. And I think if you look at what happened in New Orleans, I think their assumption incorrectly was that they could, convert the advertisers who were advertising in print into digital advertisers, and that didn't turn out to work out for them. So at this point, it wouldn't make economic sense for us to do it. Yes?
Thanks, Peter. I have two questions for you.
Well, I don't know if you're entitled to two questions.
One of them is this the year the Dodgers will finally go to the World Series?
Yes, it is. Although we shouldn't be talking about baseball today in this group.
Elevate the baseball.
Okay.
The second question is, a lot of communities have seen their community newspapers really diminished in value. Their operations have wound down, and most of all, their role in their community as an influencer or as an institution that plays the civic role is greatly diminished. And so my question to you is not about the impact in the future of newspapers, but the impact in the future of communities, especially the smaller towns and mid-sized cities that are losing this institution.
And that's why we're committed to to keeping the institution, as strong as it is, and why we hope the community, is committed to keeping the institution as strong as it is through subscribing and advertising. And so you have to keep subscribing. So, so we're never giving away those comics. But I think a newspaper, can and should play a unifying role in a community. I think the way we operate, we can play a positive role in unifying the communities of this part of Louisiana, which, Baton Rouge, I don't think Baton Rouge's problem is New Orleans. Baton Rouge's problem is competing with Texas and China, not competing with New Orleans. And I think the same thing of New Orleans. And a lot of communities are losing that, and I think the ability to unify a community with a common set of facts is an important role that a newspaper plays, and I don't know what's going to replace it if it disappears, and in many communities and places it's disappearing. I came here from Alabama, and Advance owns 3 of the 4 big markets in Alabama, Mobile and Huntsville and Birmingham, and that cohesion for those communities is gone.
They don't read much there.
Well, they used to when I was there. Yes.
So what are y'all doing to target millennials, and are y'all projecting on what they're going to do for the future, since they don't have home phones and they don't buy newspapers?
We are, my general experience has, since I've been in this business, which is a long time now, there's always been a view that, what are you going to do about young people? They don't read the newspaper. And the chief thing that causes them to read the newspaper is they get older. So we're planning on all the millennials getting older. That's our business model, and it's worked so far.
I have a question about your editorial board.
Okay.
How often are y'all proactive about inviting people into your editorial boards, and how many are you reactive, and why type of people come talk to you?
We have a lot of people who ask to come talk. That's a great question. For the most part, I think we are reactive in the sense that people, invite themselves to come see us. We're glad to see anybody who wants to come, and there are seasons when you have a lot of delegations come see you, like when the legislature's in session and stuff like that. Separately we have community boards in Baton Rouge and New Orleans that tell us, inform us of things that we should know about, to some degree receive criticisms of the newspaper and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Were you surprised during the most recent regular session of the legislature at the effort made to remove the media from the police body-worn camera passport?
I'm never surprised by the effort of politicians to impose regimens of secrecy that will benefit politicians and make their lives easier. And that's been my experience. I think in the realm of body-worn cameras, I think the sound position, and I think the position that will prevail, is that our communities will be better off if we see what goes on those cameras, subject to certain safety requirements and delays and reasonable editing to protect the privacy of people and stuff like that. If we're going to use cameras to increase confidence in law enforcement, the way to do it is to let everyone see what's on the camera. And the truth is, I think if people saw what was on the camera, they would have in most interactions between police and citizens, if people saw what was on those cameras, they'd have a much more positive view of police than some people do in our community now. So I think we have time. It says here Rotary adjourns at 1, so I think we have time for, they're really serious about it. They put it on a plaque. I hit you with it if you don't get done. I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
Mike?
We can't hear you.
Do you ever think newspapers will get to a point where they're going to have like a consumer report that says, hey, their stories are 97% accurate or something like that, to combat the fake news that we have now?
The question is there ever going to be sort of consumer ratings on newspapers whether their stories are 97% accurate? We hope they're 100% accurate. They're not always 100% accurate, and we publish corrections on them. There's a whole, there are now websites and entities that sort of try to rate the accuracy of statements, and I don't think that really works very well. I think whether something is accurate really depends on the point of view. Just as news coverage is somewhat influenced by the point of view of the people who put it together, the people who receive it also come to it with a point of view on the question of whether it's accurate. And the other thing I'd say about this is that when people look at media and media bias, I think the ways in which the ways in which people think media are biased is not really so much in incorrect stuff they say, it's in what they choose to cover and not to cover. And so there wouldn't really be any rating system that would look at that. An example being, just because I talked to someone about it yesterday, the Congressional Budget Office rated the Republican Senate health care plan, and that included that rating included a lot of facts in it, and different media outlets highlighted different facts in their evaluation of whether the thing was a success or a failure. Some saw deficit reduction as the goal, and so they covered it from the point of view of deficit reduction. Some saw a number of insured as the goal, so they covered it from that point of view. So I don't think you really could. I don't think this is like rating whether the Chevrolet drives or not. So anyhow, you all have been great. It says I have to be done by 1, so I